Now, does the name Edward Colston ring a bell? Remember the statue vandalised and toppled during a Black Lives Matter protest in June 2020 and thrown into Bristol Harbour all those years ago? A year later, it was put on display with a survey asking what people think should be done next with it. Well, 4 years on, and they're still deciding whether to move it into a museum. Obviously, we had to send our roving reporter Nick Ellerby down there today to find out what's going on.
Hello, Mike. This is a complicated problem because historical figures and these statues mean different things to different people. Like Mr. Edward Colston, who was here until 4 years ago, and those protesters at the Black Lives Matter movement 2020 during lockdown pulled him down with ropes and dragged him some 300 metres down this street and chucked him in the harbour. He was then fished out with graffiti and everything else on him and put in a local museum for a couple of years, where the people of Bristol were consulted on what they think should happen to Mr. Colston. Now, he's a huge benefactor to the city of Bristol, but he also got a lot of his money by benefiting from the slave trade. Overwhelmingly, really, the people of Bristol are quite happy for him to stay in the museum. Here's what they told us about what they think should happen to Mr. Colston's statue.
I personally think it should have been left in the harbour because it was fitting, because obviously that was where the slaves that he would have traded came from, and it was also just like cyclical, and I don't think it deserves to be put in a place that's like on display where art is and like a place of like something to admire.
I think him being in a museum, it's a context where people can talk about, okay, he was pulled down, he's been put up here, we can talk about why that was.
As it's come down, which I think was the right thing to happen, it is a teachable moment, isn't it? So if we put it in the museum, then people can see it and we can teach the sordid history of slavery.
I don't know why we have statues of people who were slave owners. That doesn't really make any sense to me. To me, that looks like you are glorifying, for lack of better wording, a slave owner.
So really what the people of Bristol are telling us is that they think the museum is the best place for the statue of Mr. Edward Colston. We also spoke to a Green Party councillor, Christine Townsend, earlier, and she'd actually like to see the city go one step further. Here's what she told us about what she'd like to see happen to commemorate people who lost their lives in the slave trade.
We would like to have seen a separate sort of space for the entirety of Bristol's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade, rather than an addition to what is one of our central museums. And we'd also like to see a memorial to those that lost their lives as a result of what that man did in Bristol.
On the other side of the debate, you have people like Councillor Chris Windows of the Conservatives here in Bristol, who said that he thinks the statue was pulled down because of political correctness. We also spoke to a former independent candidate for the Mayor of Bristol, a guy called John Langley, and he's unhappy with what happened in 2020 and actually started a petition to put Mr. Colston back on the plinth, but that only received 60 signatures. Here's what he told me about that petition and why he started it.
Well, it was mainly to do with the fact that, you know, some self-entitled individuals felt it was their right to actually pull down public property and put it in the river. So that's what started me off. You know, let's face it, it's been here since 1895. So over the years, millions of people have been passing it every day, people going to work, you know, and people with more things on their, better things on their mind, such as paying the rent, paying the mortgage, paying their bills. And people just passed it, and it was almost invisible, you know, until they highlighted it.
John's view, though, compared to what we've found out by talking to the people here in Bristol, it does seem to be a minority view. It does look like the statue of Mr. Colston will end up in the museum on the harbour in Bristol called M Shed. There's an exhibition next month about protest, and it looks like that's where the statue will start its life from now as a permanent museum exhibit. Mike.
Thanks very much, Nick, for that report. And of course, we all remember those times when you thought, what on earth is going wrong? Why are statues being brought down? Why are statues being boarded up? Why can't people actually understand that history is what makes this country? And if you don't like it, that doesn't matter. It still doesn't make it go away if you don't want it.